a people of governance, which is a big way of saying we're going to talk about some legal issues that impact our everyday life. See, in the world of our legal system and our financial system, we have been taught to operate independently and to look after ourselves. So what happens when you have a kingdom project and a kingdom mindset and you go to implement that? And so I am joined by a very special guest, Rob Culos, who is a lawyer whose legal practice focuses on estate planning, and he and his wife have done missions internationally. So we're going to dive into this and see how we can bring a kingdom mindset into those details. Welcome back. I want to introduce my special guest, Rob Culos. Rob, you can reach him from faithforfinances.com, but his legal practice is estate planning, corporate law. What do you specialize?
A lot of estate planning, yes. Estate administration, which is letters probate when someone has died.
Okay.
And also corporate commercial matters, some real property law as well. The things that people generally need on a regular basis.
Okay, now you said right off the bat some legal terminology that sometimes that gets people. So I get that in finance all the time because it's like, what did she just say? So you said letters probate.
Letters probate.
So what is that?
Letters probate is an order of the court proving that the will is genuine and that the person named in the will is the proper executor to administer the estate.
Okay, so, and estate planning, of course, is our legacy and what happens next. I'm just going to unpack some of these things.
Yes.
Because in my experience, it's amazing how people go, and I'm sure you get this all the time too, and then it's like, whoosh, right over there.
Well, an estate plan can consist of a will and a power of attorney and a representation agreement. The one that is not negotiable, in my opinion, is the will.
Yes.
We will all leave this mortal coil one day, and so we must have a will.
Yes.
It is possible that a person could suffer a lack of capacity, either by injury or illness or something. These days, people are living into their 90s routinely, and their bodies are still going, but very often their minds don't do as well.
Yes.
And they need help from a trusted family member or a friend.
Now, we did not talk about this, but let's talk about what happens if somebody doesn't have a will. We'll start with that one, and then we can also talk about maybe the power of attorney or representation agreement, because these are terms, and if we're going to legally operate as a people of governance, what you and I were talking about is having attended to the details and to understand what they mean. So what happens we're in Canada, but people are going to be listening all around the world.
Right.
And so in Canada and in most nations, you've traveled internationally, but if you die and if you go on to be with the Lord, and you don't have a piece of paper that says what you want to have happen, what happens?
What happens? Well, in British Columbia, there is legislation called the Wills, Estates and Succession Act.
Yes.
And that determines who will be your heirs, who will inherit your property.
Okay.
And so a number of problems can arise because, for example, the legislation might dictate that young children inherit, but there's no trustee, and sometimes the public guardian and trustee steps in. Now, they are well-intentioned, but you don't necessarily want your children's inheritance being managed by the public guardian and trustee.
Of course not.
Also, what can happen is that there can be a number of people who would qualify to be the administrator, kind of like the executor. And sometimes they don't agree who should do this job. And so you can have needless family disputes over a very simple issue. Sure.
So it's starting with the end in mind. And for years and years, when I was still in practice, I always encouraged people to think about it as a legacy.
Yes.
But it's not like you're going to die because people don't want to deal with it. And in fact, I have a very sad story of somebody that I walked with for a very long time. But the very last thing she did, consciously, before she went on to be with the Lord, was sign her will.
Right.
And nobody wants to deal with it. And yet we all know, and especially as Christians, we know that we're going to be welcomed into the arms of Jesus. That's all good. But we also know that we leave behind our loved ones.
Yes.
And so dealing with these things matter. So bad things people do. Do you have any interesting stories about people trying to do this thing on their own?
Yes, in fact, I do. I had a friend whose mother did her own will. Her intention, no doubt, was to leave her estate in equal shares to her two children.
Yeah, okay.
But in the event that one of her children would die, leaving children of their own,
Sure.
then she would want those children to inherit. So she did up her will, and then she died. But inadvertently, she left all of her grandchildren, not all of her grandchildren, some of her grandchildren, and some of them who were born after the date of the will, they got nothing.
Oops.
And then the public guardian and trustee came in to manage the money, and they do a good job of making sure the money is not wasted or spent, and they actually do return interest, but they charge fees.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's I just can't recommend it as a good plan.
So now I know in my experience, I have people trying to do things and then they want to run it by me and they want to validate why they're doing things so that they can avoid the fees.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, good.
So very often I will have people come to me and said, I want to put my children's name on the title to my house.
Yep.
So that when I go, they will automatically become the owners of this house. No probate fees.
Yeah.
No need to probate the will. It's simple, right? However, it is possible that the adult children can end up having creditors. Their marriages can run into trouble.
Yeah.
And then you've got third parties thinking that they have a piece of this house, when in fact they shouldn't. And the other problem, of course, is the tax man. So if you add your children on the title of your house and you don't do the proper paperwork and then you die, your part of the house is a tax-free capital gain, but their part is a taxable capital gain. And so you can end up, and I believe in paying taxes. I pay my own, and I believe people should pay their taxes, to be honest. However, I don't believe that we should pay the taxman any more than we ought to. Any more than the law requires.
Yes, fair enough, and that we have biblical reference for that. Now, there's another story that you didn't mention, and that is, you can expect that the senior person, the grandparent, is going to predecease the adult children and the grandchildren.
Yes.
But that doesn't always happen.
Oh, no, it doesn't, and I've had that. So again, this is if you add an adult child to the title of your house, and the adult child dies before you, then their share of the house disappears.
Sure.
And whereas that's probably not what the senior parent would want. They would want to preserve an even distribution amongst their children.
Yeah, we had that exact thing happen in our household when I was just starting in finance. And I knew it was wrong, but I didn't quite know why. And it ended up being kind of funny, but it could have been really, really bad. And it was funny because my uncle was in hospice, and it was like, oh, this is not going to end well, because he had the grandparents' money, and my mom had passed on.
Right.
And so he was in hospice, and I'm like, oh, not good, not good, not good. And it turns out he came out of hospice, and he phones me up, and I'm thinking the next thing I knew, he was going to be not around, and instead he phones me up and he said, I'm working on the taxes for your grandmother. And I'm like, what? So it's a good thing. But things like this happen all the time. We know people that exact same thing. Well, I'm going to give the house to so-and-so, and I'm going to give the investment account to somebody else. And then they don't grow the same.
No, they don't. And I had one estate once where this person had a lot of family members, and some were her favorites and some not so much. So what she did is she took her house and divided amongst the children that she didn't like as much, and gave her favorite ones a dollar amount. The house increased in value dramatically. So what ended up happening is that her wishes were not carried out in effect. And so the other thing people should remember is that you make a plan, you need to revisit the plan. And I would recommend a minimum of 5 years. And if your children are young and they become adults, you have to review your estate plan. If there's a disability or a death or a divorce, you have to revisit your estate plan. If somebody moves out of the country, revisit your estate plan.
I when I was teaching finance, the I don't know, the thing that you said was hatches, matches, and dispatches.
Yeah.
That's when you need to review it. Okay, so now that's an estate plan, which
Yep.
is really the end in mind. What is your legacy? And how do you document it? And we've kind of touched a little bit on fees.
Yes.
And we didn't really talk about fees, but we talked about the necessity of the professional advice.
Yes.
Because there's a value in that you might not necessarily see, but it'll be your legacy.
Well, I've done quite a number of estates, and I've seen people who wanted to save $200 or $300 on a proper will. They had a bad will or a homemade will.
Yeah.
And they ended up costing their family members thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And so the loss is out of proportion to the supposed savings.
Sure.
And that's just dollars.
Yeah.
Now we talk about stress. So when a family member dies,
Yeah.
it's natural to have grief and stress and sometimes even anger.
Yeah.
And if you have a financial situation that has been thrown into turmoil, then that just magnifies all this negative stuff.
Of course, of course. So let's talk about some of those financial concepts.
Sure.
And then maybe we'll share a few more stories, because I think that you can learn by sharing, which is really, if you've listened to any of the episodes, and if you haven't, then I encourage you to go back and listen to some episodes. Community, community, community. We learn by sharing and breaking down some of these walls and breaking down some of this assumption, breaking down some of this pride even, so that we can bring God into the conversation and then be open and share up front. In fact, maybe even before I talk about the concepts, you talked about the necessity or the difference between families that talk about
Yes.
what they're doing and the ones that don't.
Yes. And so there are a number of conversations that people ought to have. They're not necessarily happy conversations, but they're realistic and they need to be had. So we need to talk about our mortality.
Yep.
We're not on this planet forever. That's a fact.
Sure.
The other eventuality that people should talk about is disability. They should say, well, if I'm in the hospital and it looks like I'm not coming out, could you please help me? And then if you could please help that person. So you need to choose who's going to help, because the legislation does provide that people are allowed to help. But what if the doctors are there at the hospital? And I've had this, a bunch of family members come because there's a crisis, and now they're arguing.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And the doctor can't sort out who they should listen to. Whereas if you have documentation, it's clear. I had a very sad situation once, and I hope I don't cry, but a good friend of mine, he had brain cancer, and his adult son, who was about 20 at the time, who is now a doctor, was questioning the doctor, who was on hand at the time.
Okay.
And she said, don't worry, I've got this. And the mother said, I've delegated authority to the doctor, and we have the documentation. So please, I know you're upset, but please just let us do what we need to do.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is that sometimes proper paperwork can help a family in crisis make some very good decisions.
And pre-planning.
And pre-planning.
Pre-planning. Do it when you're non-emotional.
Yes.
So here's the financial concepts. Starting with the end in mind.
Yep.
And there are 4 quadrants of the 12-step money minding process and methodology. There's the planning, the planting, the cultivating, and the harvest.
Yes.
And so in this case, we could say that the harvest is your legacy, is the relationships and the what you're leaving for your family. Just let them grieve, let them have the memories, don't let them bicker. I mean, we want to be one. So start with the end in mind, determine the costs.
Yep.
And there are financial costs, but there's also the emotional costs. Like, really, do you want to be remembered by the bickering? Do you want to be remembered by the coulda, shoulda, woulda? Or do you, and I was cheap, or that, they were too cheap, or do you want to be remembered by the legacy? And we haven't even talked about some of the things with insurance, and because that's another whole topic. I'm sure we'll do another show. And then connect with the people and build your team.
Yes.
And people that understand your heart, but can help you, because as we said at the beginning of this show, the legal system and our financial system want us to separate. right? We want to be independent.
Yes, we do naturally want to be independent, and the law does permit people to act independently.
Yes.
However, the law also provides structures whereby people can join together. So, for example, people can join together and form a society for a non-profit purpose,
Yes.
For education or for the advancement of religion,
Yeah.
or for the alleviation of poverty,
Yeah.
or for any other purpose that has that is there to serve the community.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so that has been part of our laws, our legal system, for since basically day one, and that is encouraged. And also in terms of the money, the government realizes that it is proper for people to reach into their own pockets, put money on the table
Yeah.
for people that need help.
Yeah.
And so the tax laws are such that this is permitted.
Sure. Well, and the same thing with corporations.
Yes.
People can gather together. Jeremiah 29:7 is one of my favorite scriptures because it's, as the community prospers, so do you. It's pray for the community to which I have called you to into exile.
Right.
Because as it prospers, so do you. And right away, it's like, oh yeah, because we know this, that it's not just what you know, but it's who you know to get the information. And if you have God's wisdom, then he will guide you to the knowledge and lead you to the understanding so that you can do these things. But if you're making all your decisions based on, well, I can't afford it and I don't want to deal with that, then,
Right.
it's not so good.
And also, like you mentioned earlier, that it's really good to look at the end game. Like
Yeah.
what's the result going to be of all this? And so when people get together for a business purpose, and that's one of the things that makes this country, in my opinion, a great country,
Yeah.
because people are allowed to do that. We're allowed to join together, and what we're asking ourselves is, what will the public like? What can we present to the marketplace that people will enjoy?
Yeah.
And so that's why we have, the choices we have in this country economically.
Yeah.
But also in terms of pre-planning, I encourage people to do the same sort of planning in their business.
Sure, yeah.
So if you have a corporation, that's great. If you have more than one person, however,
Yeah.
you should have a shareholders agreement. If you want to do a partnership, that's fine.
Yeah.
Have a partnership agreement.
Yeah.
Because people being people, they can disagree on basic things, and you can actually, in an agreement, you can delegate.
Yep.
Who's going to do what. And what I've seen a lot is that some people are visionaries. They know where they want to go with the company. Other people are better with numbers,
Yeah.
crunching numbers, planning money. Other people are better with their hands, actually doing the work, whatever.
Yeah.
And so what you can do is you can assemble a team and everybody contributes a key part of that effort.
Yeah.
But you write it down in paper.
Yeah.
Or on paper, so people will agree, even before they make their first dollar,
Sure,
that
yeah.
here's where we're going to go, and here's how we're going to work together.
Yeah, we've talked about this because somewhere along the line there's got to be paperwork. You start with the end. But what's interesting about that is, so we said start with the end in mind, determine the cost, connect with your people, build your team. The fourth one, which you just talked about, is focus on who's going to benefit.
Yeah.
So looking at other people, who's involved, and not just protecting yourself, but when you look at who's going to be the recipient or not,
Right.
how does that impact your decision? What is the impact to the bigger community, to your family, to your legacy, or to the others that are going to be involved? The next one is invest in professional expertise. And we're not saying that because we're
No.
professionals. It's because we've been there, done that, seen what happens.
Exactly. Well, I've seen wreckage created for no good reason. I've seen people draft their own wills, administer their own estates, try to run their own lawsuits, try to write their own, and one of the things that's happened, of course, in the 21st century is Google.
Yeah.
Dr. Google, lawyer Google.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah,
financial Google,
Yeah,
all that
yeah.
stuff. And I've looked at a lot of wills that started with Google.
Sure. Yeah.
And but again, talking about relationship, now that's key to this whole
Of
conversation.
course it is, yeah.
And so I would encourage people not only to obtain advice from professionals, but to try to build an actual relationship. Because a professional who really understands
Yeah.
your priorities, your family, your friends,
Yeah.
your view of the world,
Yeah.
that person is more likely to give you legal advice, accounting advice, financial advice
Yeah.
that really does work for you.
Sure, it's not just transactional.
It's not
And
just
it's not
exactly.
and it's not just short term.
Exactly.
There's a bigger picture, because every transaction is a piece of a bigger picture. And so Google is a really actually good place to start sometimes.
Yes.
To frame your questions so that you don't get taken.
Right.
Oh, and so that you can start to come up with an idea, but you still need to be papered. You still need to invest in the professional expertise. Unless, of course, you want to do things small or, you know.
Well, there's one eventuality that some people face, and I often say go online and do some research. So,
Yeah.
for example, a living will, also known as a representation agreement, that is very useful if a person loses his or her capacity. And I say to people, don't take my word for it.
Yeah.
Read online. You will see the grief you can avoid if you have one of these things.
Sure. Well, then the other thing that we have to caution people about, though, is a wealth of opinions. Like in a multitude of counsel, there is great wisdom.
Yes.
But a multitude of counsel is not a multitude of opinions.
True.
Right? Then
Yeah.
you can get completely befuddled and mixed up.
That's right.
And so I have been sharing on the show and in money mining programs to pay attention to where there's anxiety. So if there's anxiety, it's an opportunity to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
It's an opportunity to get answers. And if you're making decisions based on anxiety, you know, there's one thing to know, you know, feel the fear and do it anyways, I suppose. But it's another thing to be fear-based in your decision making.
Yes.
And so why would somebody be afraid of putting something to paper is, you know, those are interesting things.
Yeah, no, it is. And I meet a lot of people who have just lost a loved one. So I do a lot of estates. Mm-hmm. And some people have fear. And in fact, so for example, suppose you were an elderly person and you've just lost your partner, and your partner has always taken care of the finances, or has always done the cooking or whatever.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're alone in a house that you've lived in for decades with that person, and you're afraid of everything. You're afraid of, you know, can I meet somebody if you want to meet somebody?
Yeah.
Can I cook? Can I clean? Can I manage the money?
Yeah.
Can I live by myself?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and people are often very, very afraid, and they need good counsel at that point.
Sure, and stuff like that can be pre-planned and pre-set up too, because we know that it's going to happen. I mean,
Yeah.
Joe and I moved to some little town in some big old church that needed a lot of work, and both of us, it was like, okay, well, what happens if, you know, like, are we both going to stay here?
Yeah.
And I said, you better tell me where the water shutoff is, you know, stuff like that.
Right.
Because that's his department. But similarly, we have to share and be open with each other and with our daughter about what happens. You know, is it possible that she and her husband and grandkids are going to move to this little town and take this up? I don't know. So you plan that, right? We don't want to leave that with our heirs.
Right.
So-
And anxiety, yes, because anxiety can get in the way of the conversation.
Yeah.
The conversation you need to have.
Yeah.
You know, what happens when I die? Mm-hmm. What if I lose my capacity? Things
Sure.
like that.
Yeah, what happens at the end? Well, who's going to get this, that, or the other thing?
Yeah.
You know, the fisticuffs can come out. And
Or the knives.
Or, yeah, all of that, right? And that well, you're whatever. I wanted that, and people can argue over the smallest things. And
People, yeah, and the smallest things, yeah. And I'm not going to give you the example that I was, because that's confidential for the moment. But looking around, I mean, you could actually write on the bottom of all these wonderful things, these interesting objects,
Yeah.
who might get that clock or that thing over there.
Yeah.
And you could settle arguments, and people do that all the time.
Yeah, we actually had that exact same thing happen. When my grandmother died, everything was planned.
Oh,
and it was
okay.
beautiful. My dad and my uncle knew where the money was, in what pocket of whatever, and they knew everything. And everything was labeled, even
Yeah.
like right down to the littlest, minutest thing. And everybody wanted the Hamilton Beach Mixmaster. And we were all kind of going around and putting things in piles, and we went out and we came back and it was in our pile. I was like, what? She put the name on the bottom because
Wow.
Joe had admired it.
Yes.
Every time he came out. So it was beautiful because it ended the conversation. No ifs, ands, or buts about
Right.
it. So let's wrap this up
Sure.
a little bit with, we started, the topic is legally operating as a people of governance.
Okay?
Which is a big title. Lots of mouthfuls.
Sure.
Because there is a lot to it.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that what people will get is that there is a lot to it, and it is a big deal, but it's okay to talk about it. That there's more issues than we will ever probably know,
Right.
but to start the conversation and to start with the end in mind and work backwards and to seek the advice and to seek the counsel.
Yes, yes.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Otherwise, I'll close in prayer. But you
Sure. Well, I'm proud to be a Canadian, partly because we have the rule of law.
Yeah.
We live under law, and the law tries to, bring order into the society.
Like it.
But as Christians, we also believe in the ultimate law.
Yeah.
And that will help to bring order into our lives.
Yeah.
And we can lovingly encourage others to become open to the order that they would want in their lives.
Yeah.
And so what we have, of course, is we have the greatest lawyer in the universe.
Amen. Amen. That's awesome. So let me close in prayer and just thank you, Lord, for your laws that are written on our heart. And thank you, Lord, that you are the God of order and harmony. Thank you, God, that you are the Lord of relationship and that you call us first into relationship with you and with each other. And that in all we do, we can come to you with faith and love and hope, knowing that you have good plans and purposes and that you have a home for each of us. That when there is fear, doubt, or sorrow, that you hold all those tears and that you promise to work all of these things for good for those who seek you. And so, Lord, we seek you and we thank you. And in your mighty name, Jesus, we pray and we believe. And thank you ever so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
So
You're very welcome.
For you.
Absolutely.
And your wife, we can carry on. I'm sure we will.
Okay.
And so God bless you all. And
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.